I watched my mother hand my sister the keys to my apartment with a smile I'd seen 1,000 times before, the one that said I didn't matter. Everything inside belongs to Rachel now, Sa, Mom said, patting my sister's hand. The furniture, the art collection, the jewelry, all of it. Your sister won't be needing any of it where she's going. Where I was going was 6 feet under, apparently. Or at least that's where I'd been 3 months ago when the carbon monoxide leak in my old apartment had killed me in my sleep. But here I was, very much alive, standing in the hallway of my mother's house, watching them pick over my corpse like vultures. Only they didn't know I was back. In my previous life, I died at 28, alone in that apartment, and hadn't discovered until my hazy final moments, reading my mother's text messages, that my family had been systematically stealing from me for years. My sister Rachel had a key. My mother had been taking pieces of my art collection to fund Rachel's lifestyle. My father had even forged my signature to take out a loan against my apartment. When I'd gasped my last breath, my final thought had been bitter regret. Then I'd woken up on my 18th birthday, a decade earlier, with every memory intact. I'd spent the last 10 years preparing for this moment. "Are you sure about this, Eleanor?" my father asked Mom, though his eyes were already calculating the value of my things. "Shouldn't we wait a bit longer? It's only been 3 months." "Rachel needs a bigger place," Mom said firmly, "and Emily would have wanted her sister to have it. They were so close." I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Close. Rachel had actively sabotaged every relationship I'd ever had, stolen my college boyfriend, and convinced my parents I was mentally unstable so they'd cut me out of family decisions. In my previous life, I'd been too blind to see it, too desperate for familial love to recognize that they'd never actually loved me at all. This time, I'd seen it coming from miles away. "The art alone is worth $500,000, Rachel said, her voice dripping with false sadness. "Poor Emily always had such good taste. It's tragic, really." Tragic, right. I slipped away from the doorway before they could sense my presence. I'd perfected the art of being invisible to them over the past 10 years. It was surprisingly easy when you stopped trying to get their attention, when you stopped begging for scraps of affection, when you became a ghost in your own life. But I wasn't a ghost, not anymore. I pulled out my phone and made a call. "Mr. Peterson, it's Emily Chen. I'm ready to move forward with the estate planning we discussed." "Yes, all of it. I want everything transferred and secured by the end of the week." Let me take you back to where this really started. Not to my death, but to my rebirth. I'd woken up in my childhood bedroom on the morning of my 18th birthday, gasping, my heart pounding, absolutely certain I'd just died. The floral wallpaper was the same pattern from a decade ago. My high school backpack was slung over my desk chair. Through the window, I could see my father's old Honda, the one he'd sold 5 years before my death. I'd been given a second chance. For the first few weeks, I'd been in shock, questioning my sanity, but the memories were too vivid, too specific. I knew things that hadn't happened yet. I knew that the tech company my college roommate would start would become a billion-dollar empire. I knew about the housing market crash, the crypto boom, every major world event that would unfold, but more importantly, I knew what my family would do to me. In my previous life, I'd inherited a substantial trust fund from my maternal grandmother when I turned 21. Grandma Chen had been the only one who'd truly loved me, who'd seen my worth. She died when I was 19, and her will had left me $2 million, a fortune she'd amassed through savvy investments. I'd been naive then. I'd shared everything with my family, helped them out of debt, funded Rachel's failed business ventures, paid for my parents' vacation home. By the time I was 25, half the money was gone, drained away by 1,000 small requests and large loans that were never repaid. The other half I'd invested in my art collection and my apartment. The apartment they were now stealing from my corpse. This time, I'd played it differently. When Grandma Chen had called me to her bedside at 19, I'd been ready. I'd spent a year cultivating our relationship, showing her I was more than the overlooked granddaughter. I'd talked to her about investments, about art, about her life. I'd actually listened. "You're different from the others," she'd told me, her weathered hand gripping mine. "You have your grandfather's eyes. Sharp, calculating. Don't let them make you soft, Emily." "I won't, Grandma." "Your mother," she'd paused, choosing her words carefully. "Eleanor was always ambitious. She married your father for his potential, but he never lived up to it. She's bitter. And Rachel is Eleanor's mirror. Be careful of mirrors, child. They show you what you want to see, not what's real. When she'd died, her will had been different this time. I gently suggested she use a different lawyer, one who wouldn't immediately inform my mother of the contents. The trust was established with ironclad protections. My family wouldn't even know about the full extent of my inheritance. To them, I'd received $200,000, a respectable sum, but nothing like the actual $2.5 million Grandma had left me. The rest was hidden in offshore accounts, trust funds with delayed vesting, and investments made through shell corporations. I'd told my family I'd blown through most of my small inheritance on bad investments. They'd believed it because it confirmed what they already thought of me, that I was foolish, impractical, a dreamer, who'd never amount to anything. Meanwhile, I'd been building an empire. I'd invested in that tech company before my roommate even graduated. I'd bought Bitcoin when it was pennies. I'd purchased real estate in neighborhoods I knew would gentrify. By the time I was 25 in this timeline, my net worth was close to $50 million, and my family had no idea. To them, I was still pathetic Emily, scraping by as a freelance graphic designer, living in a modest apartment, driving a 10-year-old car. I'd maintained the facade perfectly, down to the last detail, including staging my own death. It hadn't been easy. I'd needed help, real professional help. I'd found it in Marcus Webb, a former intelligence operative who'd gone private. He specialized in helping people disappear, and he owed me a favor. I'd invested in his security firm early, making him a very wealthy man. You want to fake your death? He'd asked, amused. That's ambitious. I want to see what they'll do, I'd explained. I want proof of everything they've been doing, and I want them to think they've won before I destroy them. He'd helped me stage the carbon monoxide leak. We'd used a body double, a Jane Doe who'd died of natural causes, similar enough in build and dental structure that a cursory examination wouldn't raise flags. We'd made sure the body was discovered weeks later, badly decomposed. The death certificate was genuine, signed by a coroner who'd been told this was part of a federal investigation, because it was. While I'd been preparing for my death, I'd also been preparing a case. Every forged signature, every stolen piece of art, every unauthorized transaction. I'd documented it all. I'd installed cameras in my apartment. I'd hired forensic accountants. I'd built an airtight case of fraud, theft, and identity theft that would send all three of them to prison. But I'd wanted to give them enough rope to hang themselves. 3 months after my death, they'd taken the bait spectacularly. My mother had immediately filed to have herself declared administrator of my estate, claiming I'd had no will. She'd lied to the court saying she'd been my primary caretaker and that I'd verbally promised her everything. She'd forged documents showing I'd been mentally unstable, using fake medical records her friend, a receptionist at a psychiatrist's office, had created. Rachel had moved faster. She'd been in my apartment within days, cataloging everything of value. She'd hired appraisers, started selling pieces of my art collection online, and had even contacted a real estate agent about selling the apartment. My father had been more subtle. He'd started spreading rumors about my gambling addiction and drug problems to explain why my bank accounts were nearly empty. He'd positioned himself as the tragic father of a troubled daughter, garnering sympathy and deflecting attention from his own crimes. They'd each fallen into their roles so naturally, so enthusiastically, that watching them had been almost entertaining. Almost. The rage had been harder to control this time around. In my first life, I'd loved them despite everything. I'd made excuses, blamed myself, convinced myself that if I just tried harder, they'd love me back. Now I knew better. They were incapable of love, at least not love for me. They loved Rachel, they loved themselves, they loved money and status, and the appearance of success. I was just an inconvenience they'd tolerated for 28 years, and a windfall they'd eagerly exploited. The decision to fight back hadn't been a single moment. It had been a growing certainty, built over 10 years of careful planning and cold observation. I'd watched them from a distance, seen them for what they really were, and decided that this time justice would be served. Not the gentle kind, not the kind where I confronted them and they apologized and we all went to therapy and became a functional family. The permanent kind, the kind that would make absolutely certain they could never hurt anyone else the way they'd hurt me. I'd made my first move 6 months before my planned death. I'd contacted an investigative journalist named Diana Martinez, a woman who'd built her career exposing family fraud and elder abuse. I'd sent her an anonymous tip about my own case, framed as a concerned friend, worried about a vulnerable young woman being exploited by her family. Diana had started digging. She'd discovered the forged loan documents, the stolen art, the pattern of financial abuse. She'd been building a story, waiting for the right moment to publish. That moment would be soon. My second move had been more personal. I'd reached out to my maternal grandmother's sister, Great Aunt Catherine, who'd never liked my mother. Catherine was 85, sharp as a tack, and wealthy in her own right. She'd always suspected Eleanor had manipulated her way into Grandma Chen's good graces to secure an inheritance. Emily, she'd said when I called her 2 months after my death. But I went to your memorial service. I'm aware. Aunt Catherine, I need your help, and I have a story to tell you. I'd met her in person at her penthouse in Manhattan. I'd laid out everything, my rebirth, the decade of planning, the staged death, the evidence I'd compiled. I'd expected skepticism, maybe even disbelief. Instead, she'd laughed, a dry, crackling laugh that seemed to come from deep in her chest. Rebirth? Well, that's a new one, but you know what, girl? I don't care if you're crazy or if you've actually been sent back from the dead. Your mother is a conniving bitch, and I've waited 40 years for someone to take her down. What do you need? What I'd needed was legitimacy. Catherine was a respected philanthropist, a former federal judge, and someone the media would believe. I'd needed her to be the face of the counterattack, the sympathetic family member who'd discovered the fraud and demanded justice. She'd agreed with relish. My third move was the most complex. I'd needed to secure all my actual assets before the fake estate could be plundered. Every piece of art in my apartment was a reproduction, expensive enough to fool a casual appraiser, cheap enough that I didn't care if Rachel sold them. The real pieces were in climate-controlled storage in Switzerland, part of a collection now worth close to $3 million. The jewelry was costume, the furniture was from IKEA with some clever distressing, and the electronics were all outdated models I'd bought secondhand. The only real things in that apartment were the cameras hidden in every room, capturing every moment of their theft. The apartment itself wasn't mine anymore. I'd sold it to a shell corporation I controlled and arranged for a lease-to-own situation that made it look like I was still living there. When Rachel tried to sell it, she'd be attempting to sell property she didn't own. That would be its own special kind of crime. The plan had taken 10 years to build, and it was beautiful in its complexity. Every piece interlocked, every contingency accounted for. I'd learned patience in my second life. I'd learned that revenge wasn't about immediate gratification. It was about total victory. And now, standing in my mother's house, listening to them plan how to divide my estate, I knew the time had come to spring the trap. I made my way down to the basement where I'd stored some old boxes, or at least where my family thought I'd stored old boxes. In reality, this was my command center. I'd installed it 5 years ago during a week when my parents were on vacation. Fake wall, hidden room, the works. Inside was a bank of monitors showing live feeds from my apartment, my parents' house, Rachel's condo, and several other key locations. I also had filing cabinets full of physical evidence, backup hard drives, and a secure satellite internet connection. I sat down and pulled up the feeds. In my apartment, Rachel was directing a team of movers. She'd wasted no time. She was wearing one of my designer dresses, a real one I'd deliberately left behind, knowing she wouldn't be able to resist, and playing the grieving sister for the workers. "Be careful with that painting," she said, her voice dripping with fake emotion. "It was my sister's favorite. She bought it at a gallery in Paris. She had such an eye for art. I'd bought it at Target. It was a mass-produced print that cost $40. But the movers didn't know that, and Rachel clearly didn't either. She'd never had taste. She just knew how to mimic it. In our first life, she'd done the same thing with my real collection, selling pieces worth thousands for hundreds because she couldn't tell the difference. At my parents' house, Mom and Dad were going through boxes I'd supposedly stored in their attic. These were even better. They were full of important documents that were actually carefully constructed evidence of their crimes. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, emails I'd printed out, forged signatures on loan documents. They didn't realize that everything they touched, every document they looked at, was adding to the digital and physical paper trail that would convict them. "We should burn these," Dad said, holding up a bank statement. "If anyone investigates, these could be problematic." "Don't be paranoid," Mom said. "Emily's dead. No one's investigating anything. We're her family. We have every right to her things." "What about the discrepancies in the account?" "What discrepancies?" "You're seeing problems where there aren't any. Emily was disorganized. Everyone knew that. If there are some missing funds, well, she probably spent them on something frivolous. You know how she was?" The casual character assassination made my blood boil. In my previous life, I'd been meticulous with money. I'd had to be, knowing my family was constantly borrowing. But I'd never been able to prove the theft, never been able to make anyone believe me. This time, I had proof of everything. I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to Diana Martinez. It was time to bring her fully into the loop. "Diana," I typed. "You don't know me, but I've been your anonymous source on the Eleanor Chen case. I'm ready to go public. I'm attaching evidence of systematic fraud, identity theft, and estate fraud. I'm also attaching proof that I'm alive and that the death certificate filed 3 months ago is part of an elaborate sting operation. I'm the daughter, I'm Emily Chen, and I'm going to need you to break this story in exactly 72 hours. I'll make myself available for an exclusive interview. In the meantime, I'm also sending this evidence to the FBI, the State Attorney General, and the probate court. My family has been stealing from me for 10 years, and they think they've gotten away with it. They're about to learn otherwise." I hit send and leaned back in my chair. 72 hours. That's all the time I'd give them to dig themselves deeper. Then the hammer would fall. Over the next 3 days, I watched my family's greed reach spectacular heights. Rachel had moved fully into my apartment. She'd thrown out most of my personal belongings, photos, books, the handmade quilt Grandma Chen had given me, and replaced them with her own tacky furniture. She'd posted on social media about her new place, carefully framing it as a bittersweet inheritance from her beloved late sister. The comments were nauseating. "You're so brave for honoring her memory this way. She would want you to be happy. Family is everything. I'm sure she's smiling down on you. If I'd been dead, I'd have been rolling in my grave." She'd also started selling my art. The reproductions were going for decent prices, $500 here, $1,000 there. She thought she was making a killing. She had no idea that every sale was being documented, every transaction tracked by the forensic accountants I'd hired. My parents had been busy too. They'd filed formal paperwork to close my estate, claiming there were no assets beyond the apartment contents and a small bank account. They'd conveniently forgotten to mention the trust fund from Grandma Chen, even though they'd been aware of it in my previous life. This was where my planning really paid off. I'd set up the trust so that it would trigger an automatic alert if anyone tried to claim I was dead. The trustees, a law firm in Boston, had immediately flagged the death certificate as potentially fraudulent and launched their own investigation. My parents didn't know they were being investigated. They didn't know that their phones were tapped, their emails monitored, their financial records being pulled by federal investigators. They thought they were winning. On day 2, Rachel made her biggest mistake. She tried to access my actual bank accounts, the ones that held the remnants of my small inheritance. She'd somehow gotten my passwords, probably from my laptop, and tried to transfer $50,000 to her own account. The accounts were flagged. The bank called the police. Rachel was brought in for questioning. She talked her way out of it, claiming she was the estate administrator, she wasn't, and that she had every right to access her dead sister's money. She showed them forged documents, a power of attorney she'd backdated, supposedly signed by me before my death. The police, overwhelmed and not particularly interested in what seemed like a family dispute, let her go with a warning. That was fine. I had it all on camera anyway. And the forgery charge would be just one more count against her. On day 3, my father did something I hadn't anticipated. He contacted a life insurance company claiming I'd had a policy that named him as beneficiary. He submitted a claim for $500,000. I didn't have a life insurance policy. He'd simply invented one. forged my signature on the application months ago and had been paying the premiums out of an account he thought I couldn't track. In my previous life, he'd done something similar with credit cards. He'd opened them in my name, maxed them out, and destroyed my credit. I'd spent years recovering from it. This time, the insurance company did what they always do with large death claims. They investigated. They found discrepancies. They found that the policy had been opened with forged documents. They called the FBI. The trap was closing faster than I'd even planned. 72 hours after I'd contacted Diana Martinez, her story went live. Family fraud ring exposed. Daughter fakes death to catch thieves. The article was devastating. Diana had done her homework. She'd interviewed Great-Aunt Catherine, who provided testimony about my mother's history of manipulation. She'd spoken with my grandmother's former lawyer, who confirmed that Eleanor had tried to contest the will before I'd been born, claiming she deserved more. She'd obtained copies of the forged documents, the security footage from my apartment, the bank records showing years of unauthorized transfers. She'd even found 3 other people my family had scammed, distant relatives and family friends who'd loaned money to my parents that was never repaid. And she'd secured the crowning jewel, an interview with me. The photo she ran was recent, taken a week ago. I was very clearly alive, standing next to Great-Aunt Catherine, holding a copy of that day's newspaper. The caption read, "Emily Chen, very much alive, with her Great-Aunt Catherine Chen, former federal judge." The article quoted me extensively. "My family has been stealing from me since I received my inheritance at 21. They forged documents, took out loans in my name, and systematically drained my accounts. When I realized the extent of the theft, I decided to stage my death to gather evidence. I wanted to see how far they'd go. I wanted absolute proof that this wasn't love, wasn't family looking out for each other. It was calculated criminal fraud. The woman they buried wasn't me. She was a Jane Doe, and my death was part of a law enforcement operation. Every document my family has filed since then, every item they've taken from what they thought was my estate is part of an ongoing criminal case. I loved them. I wanted to believe they loved me, but love doesn't steal. Love doesn't forge. Love doesn't cash in on your death. This is about justice now, not just for me, but for everyone they've hurt." The story broke at 6 a.m. By noon, it had gone viral. My phone, the new one registered under a different name, was flooded with notifications. The story had been picked up by every major news outlet. Emily Chen's revenge was trending on Twitter. TikTok was full of people doing dramatic readings of the article. But the best part was watching my family's reaction in real time. Rachel saw it first. She was in my apartment, her apartment now, she thought, getting ready for brunch with friends. I watched on the security cameras as she scrolled through her phone, her face going from confusion to shock to pure, unfiltered terror. She called my mother immediately. "Did you see it? Did you fucking see it?" "See what?" My mother's voice was groggy. It was barely 7 a.m. on a Saturday. "The news! Emily's alive. It's everywhere. Oh my God, there are pictures, Mom. She's alive and she's saying, we stole from her and there's evidence." The phone fell silent. Then I heard my mother's voice, cold and sharp. "This is fake. It has to be fake. Emily is dead. We buried her. This is some kind of hoax, some attention-seeking. There are pictures, Mom, recent pictures. And the article says the death certificate was fake. Part of some sting operation. The FBI is involved. The FBI!" I could almost see my mother's mind working, trying to find a way out, an angle, an explanation. She'd always been good at that, at twisting reality to suit her narrative. But there was no twisting this. My father was the last to find out. He was on a golf course celebrating what he thought was his successful insurance fraud when his lawyer called. I didn't have audio on that, but I didn't need it. I watched him on the security footage I'd installed in his car months ago, a little insurance policy of my own. His face went white. He dropped his phone. He sat down on the curb next to his Mercedes and put his head in his hands. 3 hours later, the FBI raided my apartment. I watched it happen live, a bowl of popcorn in my lap, feeling more satisfied than I'd felt in 2 lifetimes. Rachel had tried to run. She'd thrown clothes into a suitcase, grabbed what cash she could find, and was heading for the door when the agents knocked. They'd executed the warrant flawlessly, professional, efficient, completely overwhelming. "Rachel Chen, FBI, we have a warrant for your arrest." "This is insane. I didn't do anything. That apartment belonged to my sister, and she's dead." "Your sister is alive, and this apartment doesn't belong to you. You're being charged with fraud, identity theft, attempted theft of property, forgery, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." They handcuffed her right there in my living room, read her Miranda rights, and led her out past a growing crowd of neighbors and press. She was crying, screaming that this was a mistake, that I was the crazy one, that she was the victim. No one believed her. My parents were arrested simultaneously at their home. The agents found them in the middle of burning documents. The very documents I'd planted for them to find, the ones they thought incriminated them. They didn't realize I had copies of everything, digital, physical, backed up in 3 countries. Eleanor Chen, Robert Chen, you're under arrest. My mother tried the same tactic she always did: charm. Officers, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Our daughter has clearly had some kind of mental break. We've been worried about her for years. She's not well, you see, and ma'am, we have recordings of you discussing how to hide the theft from investigators. We have forged documents with your fingerprints. We have bank records showing unauthorized transfers going back 8 years. You can explain it all to the judge. They were processed, booked, and held without bail. The prosecution argued, successfully, that they were flight risks with access to stolen funds and a demonstrated pattern of fraud. The media circus that followed was spectacular. I gave my exclusive interview to Diana Martinez 3 days after the arrests. We sat in Great Aunt Catherine's penthouse, the Manhattan skyline glittering behind us, and I told my story. All of it. I talked about the years of emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the favoritism that made me feel worthless. I talked about discovering the theft, about the moment I died in my previous life, about waking up 10 years in the past with a chance to make things right. You're saying you actually died and were reborn? Diana asked carefully. I'm saying that's what I experienced, whether it was a near-death hallucination, a psychological break, or something genuinely supernatural. I don't know. What I know is that I had knowledge I shouldn't have had. I knew things that hadn't happened yet. And I used that knowledge to protect myself and build a case against people who'd been hurting me for my entire life. Some people might say this was entrapment. Some people might. But I didn't force my family to commit crimes. I didn't make my mother forge documents or my sister steal from my apartment or my father commit insurance fraud. I just gave them the opportunity to show who they really were, and they took it. The interview aired in prime time. It was viewed by 15 million people in the first 24 hours. The public response was overwhelmingly in my favor. There were some who thought I'd gone too far, who argued that family should forgive family, that I should have tried to work things out. But most people understood. They understood that some betrayals are unforgivable. They understood that when people show you who they are, you should believe them. And they understood that sometimes justice requires a little creativity. The trial took 6 months to prepare. The prosecution had so much evidence, they had to pare it down to keep the trial manageable. They focused on the most egregious charges: the identity theft, the forged estate documents, the insurance fraud, the sale of property they didn't own. My family hired a team of expensive lawyers using money they'd stolen from me, which was its own special irony. The lawyers tried every tactic they could think of. They argued I was mentally unstable. The prosecution brought in psychiatrists who'd evaluated me and found me completely sound. They argued I'd entrapped them. The judge threw out that argument. You can't entrap someone into committing fraud against a living person. They argued that the death certificate had been fraudulent and therefore I'd committed a crime. The prosecution pointed out that it had been part of an authorized law enforcement operation and that I'd had immunity from the start. They even tried to argue that because I'd claimed to have memories from a past life, I was clearly delusional and my testimony was unreliable. That was when Great Aunt Catherine took the stand. She was 85 years old, a former federal judge, and she tore into their arguments with surgical precision. Whether my great niece experienced an actual rebirth, a prophetic dream, or simply had very good instincts doesn't matter. What matters is that she had knowledge of ongoing crimes and took appropriate steps to document and report them. She worked with law enforcement. She gathered evidence. She did everything a responsible citizen should do when they discover they're being victimized. She paused, looking directly at my mother. And Eleanor, if you're trying to argue that Emily was too unstable to be reliable, you should know that your mother, my sister, told me years ago that she regretted leaving you any inheritance at all. She said you were a grasping, cold woman who'd married for money and was raising your children to be just as calculating. She left Emily that trust fund specifically to protect it from you, so don't you dare claim that Emily is the unstable one in this family. The courtroom erupted. The judge had to call for order. That moment was the turning point. After Catherine's testimony, the defense's case collapsed. They couldn't argue mental instability when a respected former judge was vouching for me. They couldn't argue family loyalty when that same judge was exposing decades of dysfunction. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. My mother got 12 years for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. My father got 10 years for forgery, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. Rachel got 15 years because she'd been the most actively involved in the theft and had a prior fraud conviction I'd discovered from her time in college, something my parents had covered up and I'd unearthed during my investigation. They were also ordered to pay restitution, every dollar they'd stolen, plus interest, plus penalties. The total came to $3.7 million. They'd never be able to pay it. They'd declared bankruptcy within weeks of their arrest, and most of their assets were either seized or tied up in legal proceedings. But that was fine. The point wasn't the money, the point was justice. The epilogue of this story isn't just about their downfall. It's about what I built from the ashes. With my real fortune secure and growing, I started a foundation, the Emily Chen Foundation for Family Fraud Victims. We provide legal assistance, financial counseling, and emotional support for people who've been stolen from by their own families. Turns out there are a lot of us, more than I'd imagined. I work with Diana Martinez regularly now. She's expanded her investigative journalism to cover family fraud full-time, and the foundation funds her work. Together, we've exposed 17 other family fraud rings and helped secure convictions in 12 cases. I also wrote a book. Reborn, How I Faked My Death to Expose My Family's Crimes, became a bestseller. The advance alone was $2 million, and I donated every penny to the foundation. Great Aunt Catherine and I are close now. She's the grandmother I never really got to keep the first time around. We have dinner every Sunday, and she's teaching me everything she knows about the law, about power, about how to use money as a tool for good. You did a remarkable thing, she told me recently. Not the revenge, though that was satisfying, but the way you've channeled it into helping others. That's true strength. I've also reconnected with some people from my previous life. My college roommate, the one who started the tech company, is now a close friend. I'd invested in her startup early, told her I believed in her vision, and she's never forgotten it. We're working on a tech solution for fraud victims now, a blockchain-based system for protecting inheritance documents. I'm 38 years old now in this timeline, 10 years older than when I died before and got my second chance. I never got married in my first life. Rachel had sabotaged too many relationships, and I'd been too damaged to trust anyone. This time, I met someone. His name is James. He's a fraud investigator for the FBI, actually. We met during the investigation of my family. He'd been assigned to my case, found my attention to detail and evidence collection professionally arousing, his words, and asked me out 6 months after the trial ended. We've been together for 3 years now. We're getting married next month. Rachel and my parents weren't invited. They're all still in prison. My mother is in a federal facility in Pennsylvania. She's reportedly become very religious, claiming she's found God and forgiveness. She's written me several letters begging for reconciliation, saying she's sorry, that she's changed. I haven't responded, not because I'm cruel, but because I know her. This is just another manipulation, another attempt to find an angle. If I let her back in, she'd start the cycle all over again. My father is in a facility in Ohio. He's kept his head down, done his time quietly. I've heard through the grapevine that he's told other inmates he's proud of me, that I outsmarted him fair and square. I don't know if that's true or if it's just another story, but it doesn't matter. Rachel is in a maximum security facility in New York. She's had the hardest time adjusting. She's filed multiple appeals, all denied. She's tried to sell her story to tabloids, but no one's interested. She's the villain in this narrative, and the public has no sympathy for her. She'll be eligible for parole in 8 years. I've already prepared a statement for her parole hearing. I'll be there to make sure the board knows exactly who she is and what she's done. I'm not a victim anymore. I'm not the overlooked daughter begging for scraps of love. I'm not the young woman who died alone in an apartment, her family already counting her money before her body was cold. I'm Emily Chen, founder and CEO of a successful fraud prevention foundation. I'm a best-selling author. I'm an advocate for victims' rights. I'm engaged to a wonderful man who sees me for who I really am. And every day I wake up grateful for the second chance I was given, whether it was supernatural intervention, a lucky quirk of the universe, or just my brain's way of processing trauma and giving me the courage to fight back. It doesn't matter how it happened. What matters is what I did with it. Last week, I visited my grandmother's grave. I do that sometimes when I need to feel grounded, when I need to remember where I came from. I did it, Grandma, I said, placing fresh flowers on her headstone. I made you proud. I didn't let them make me soft. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and for just a moment, I could almost hear her voice. I never doubted you, child. You always had your grandfather's eyes. Sharp, calculating. I knew you'd figure it out eventually. Maybe that was just my imagination. Maybe it was something more. Either way, I knew she was right. I look at my life now. The foundation, the advocacy work, the relationships I've built with people who actually value me. And I know that this is what victory looks like. Not just destroying my enemies, but building something meaningful from the ruins. My family thought they could use me, steal from me, and discard me when I was no longer useful. They thought I was weak, foolish, easy to manipulate. They never knew what they lost. They lost the daughter who would have loved them unconditionally if they'd given her even a fraction of that love in return. They lost the sister who would have supported Rachel through anything if she'd been kind instead of cruel. They lost someone who would have made them proud, who would have taken care of them in their old age, who would have been loyal and generous and good. Instead, they got 15-year prison sentences and a place in the annals of infamous family fraud cases. Was it worth it? For me, absolutely. Not because I enjoyed watching them suffer, though I won't lie and say there wasn't satisfaction in seeing justice served, but because I finally got to live authentically. I got to be the person I was meant to be, without their voices in my head telling me I wasn't good enough. I got to be free. And freedom, I've learned, is the sweetest revenge of all. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how far I took it, if I think maybe I should have tried to forgive them, to work things out, to be the bigger person. I always tell them the same thing. Being the bigger person doesn't mean letting people hurt you. It doesn't mean sacrificing yourself on the altar of family obligation. It doesn't mean setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. Being the bigger person means recognizing your own worth, protecting yourself from harm, and refusing to let toxic people define your life. It means fighting back when you need to fight back. And it means knowing when to walk away from people who will never change, never appreciate you, never see you as anything more than a resource to exploit. I walked away. I fought back. I won. And I've never looked back. 3 years after the trial, I received an unexpected letter. It was from a young woman named Sarah, 23 years old, who'd read my book and seen my story on the news. She was being stolen from by her parents and brother. They'd drained her college fund, taken out credit cards in her name, and were pressuring her to sign over her inheritance from her grandfather. She was desperate, scared, and didn't know what to do. She asked if I could help. I met with her the next week. I listened to her story. I recognized myself in her, the desperate hope that her family would change, the guilt at even considering fighting back, the fear that she was the problem. You're not crazy, I told her. You're not ungrateful. You're being abused and you deserve better. Let me help you. We built her case over 6 months. We documented everything, worked with the foundation's lawyers, and got law enforcement involved. Her family was arrested last month. The trial is pending. But Sarah is free. She's back in school, studying psychology. She wants to work with fraud victims someday. She says I saved her life. I tell her she saved herself. I just showed her it was possible. That's what the foundation does. That's what my story does. It shows people that you can fight back. You can win. You don't have to accept abuse just because it comes from family. You can demand better. You can enforce boundaries. You can walk away. And if they've stolen from you, lied about you, tried to destroy you, you can make damn sure they face consequences. Justice isn't pretty, it isn't clean, it isn't always satisfying in the moment. But it's necessary, and it's worth fighting for. As I sit here in my office, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, my phone buzzing with messages from people who've been helped by the foundation, I think about that day 10 years ago when I woke up in my teenage bedroom. I'd been given an impossible gift, a second chance at life, armed with the knowledge of everything that had gone wrong the first time. I could have used it just to get rich. I could have avoided my family entirely, cut them off, and lived my life in peace. Instead, I chose to use it as a weapon. I chose to document their crimes, expose their cruelty, and ensure they'd never hurt anyone else. Some people think that makes me vindictive, cold, unforgiving. Maybe they're right, but I sleep soundly at night. I look at myself in the mirror and like what I see. I've built a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people who actually love me. And my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, who were supposed to protect me, are exactly where they belong. Behind bars, unable to hurt anyone else, unable to steal, manipulate, or destroy. They thought they could get away with it. They thought I was weak, that I'd never figure it out, that even if I did, I'd be too afraid or too conditioned to do anything about it. They never knew what they lost when they decided to treat me as nothing more than a piggy bank to raid. They lost their freedom. They lost their reputations. They lost everything. And I gained everything, not just money or success or vindication, though I have all of those in abundance. I gained myself, the real Emily Chen, not the timid, overlooked daughter, desperate for approval, not the victim who died alone with her family's theft as her last earthly realization, but the woman who fought back, who used her second chance to build something meaningful, who turned betrayal into purpose, who won. And that victory, that total, complete, irreversible victory, is worth more than anything they ever could have stolen from me. They never knew what they lost, but I know exactly what I gained. Everything.